Do you remember what it felt like to not know who was calling before you picked up the phone? Every ring was a mystery. Could be your best friend, could be a bill collector, could be a wrong number. You had zero information, and you picked it up anyway. That was just life. And somewhere along the way, we completely forgot that it felt totally normal. This video is about what life actually looked like before social media took over. Not the rose-tinted version, not the kids these days version. The real one, with the weird details most people have already forgotten. Because here's the thing. Most content about this era either gets it wrong or leaves out the parts that are genuinely fascinating. So we're going through the stuff that actually shaped how millennials grew up, the parts that explain a lot about why people your age think the way you do. We're starting with a few things you probably remember, and we're ending with something that will genuinely change how you see your own memory. Let's get into it. So the first thing worth talking about is something almost nobody gets right, and it's about where social media actually started. Every conversation about life before social media eventually lands on Friendster or MySpace as the beginning of it all. But that's not where it started. In 1997, 5 years before Friendster even existed, a site called 6degrees.com let you sign up with an email address, build a profile, and add friends to a personal network. That's it. That's social media. And it had 3.5 million users, mostly young adults, and then it just died in 2001 and got completely erased from the cultural memory. The reason it died wasn't the idea. The idea was right. The internet's infrastructure just wasn't ready for it yet. The pipes weren't big enough for what it was trying to do. So it collapsed, got forgotten, and then 5 years later, Friendster launched and everyone called it the first. Which means the actual origin story of social media has been misattributed for over 2 decades, and almost nobody knows the real name. 6 Degrees. That's the one. But here's what's more interesting than the trivia. The fact that it failed in 2001 means there was this entire generation of young people who got a tiny taste of what online social connection could feel like, and then had it yanked away, and then went back to living without it for another 5 years, until Friendster came back around. That gap, that period of living without it again after briefly having it, is kind of a perfect metaphor for the whole millennial experience with technology. You grew up in both worlds simultaneously, and you remember both. And the world you came from had some genuinely strange features that are worth actually understanding, not just getting nostalgic about. Take road trips. If you wanted to drive somewhere you'd never been before the mid-90s, you didn't just type an address into your phone. You walked into an AYA office and sat down with an actual human being who would take out a highlighter and draw your specific route by hand on a series of numbered maps, walking you through every turn before you left. They'd put it all together in a custom spiral-bound booklet called a triptych, made specifically for your trip, your route, nobody else's. You'd leave that office holding a physical document that represented hours of someone else's work, designed entirely around where you personally needed to go. And then you'd sit in the passenger seat with it open on your lap, calling out turns to the driver in real time, because there was no voice telling you what to do in 400 feet. You were the navigation system. The whole family was the navigation system. And if you missed a turn, you pulled over, you figured it out, and sometimes you just ended up somewhere you didn't plan to be, and it became a story you told for years. That's not worse than GPS. It's just completely different. The attention required, the collaboration, the margin for genuine adventure, all of that came from the friction. When there was no frictionless option, the friction itself became part of the experience. That's important. But if you don't understand what was happening with photographs during this same period, you're missing something that explains a lot about how people related to moments before they could document everything instantly. Taking a photo used to be an economic decision, not a reflex, not a habit, a decision with real financial stakes. Camera shops in the 80s and 90s were running on margins that would make a tech startup jealous. The actual cost to print a photo was maybe 3 or 4 cents in materials, and they charged you 36 cents for it. That's an 80 to 90% profit margin, just on printing. So a roll of 24 exposures cost real money to develop, and you didn't know what you had until you paid for it and opened the envelope. You might have 24 shots from an entire summer, maybe 36 if it was a big year. And every single one of them meant something, because you chose to spend one of your limited frames on it. You didn't take 40 photos of your lunch. You took one photo at the birthday party and hoped it came out. What that scarcity created was something that's basically impossible to manufacture now: intentionality. When you only had 24 chances, you waited for the right moment. You thought about it. You looked at the thing you were about to photograph, and you made a choice. And then you waited 2 weeks to find out if you got it. There was anticipation built into the whole process that is just completely gone now. You can take 1,000 photos today and feel nothing about any of them. And that's not a character flaw. It's just what happens when scarcity disappears. So we've covered where social media really started, and we've covered what it meant to document your life before you could do it instantly. But the communication piece, the actual mechanics of how people talk to each other, that's where things get genuinely strange when you look back at it. Let's talk about phone lines for a second. In 1950, about 75% of Bell System residential customers, roughly 11 million households, were sharing a phone line with their neighbors. This was called a party line, and it worked exactly how it sounds. Multiple households on the same line, each with their own ring pattern, so you'd learn to ignore the rings that weren't yours. One long ring meant it was for you. Two short rings meant it was for the Hendersons next door. And the thing is, anyone on that line could quietly pick up their phone and just listen to someone else's conversation. Legally. That was just how it worked. And this wasn't ancient history. Rural party lines were still operating into the 80s and 90s. Some millennials grew up with this. Your neighbors could literally eavesdrop on your phone calls, and there was nothing you could do about it except try to keep things vague. And on top of that, caller ID didn't exist for most of this era, so every single time the phone rang, you were walking into a blind situation. You had no information. The ring was the only data point you had, and it told you nothing. So you built this whole etiquette system around managing the uncertainty. Don't call after 9 p.m., screen calls through your answering machine, play phone tag for 3 days trying to connect with someone, call back during off-peak hours to save money. Sunday after 7 p.m. was an actual budgeting strategy. Long-distance calls cost real money, so you'd stack up everything you wanted to say, wait for the cheap window, and make it count. Some calling card setups required you to dial up to 36 digits just to make one call. The access code, the card number, then the actual number you were trying to reach. 36 digits. You had to know them by heart or carry them written down somewhere. Which brings up something genuinely fascinating about how people's brains worked differently before all of this got automated. Before smartphones, people held dozens of phone numbers in working memory. Not because they had better memories than us, because they had no other option. You couldn't outsource it. The number lived in your head or it didn't exist for you. Same with birthdays, addresses, directions, the name of that actor in that movie. You either knew it or you spent time actually figuring it out. And a Columbia University study found something specific about what happened when that changed. People started becoming more likely to remember where to find information than the information itself. The brain adapted. It stopped holding the data and started holding the address of the data, which is efficient, sure, but it's also a completely different cognitive experience than what people had before. A 2015 survey found 91% of people use their smartphones as an extension of their own brain, and 44% said their phone effectively serves as their memory. That's not a small shift. That's a fundamental change in how human beings relate to their own knowledge. And the wild part is that this happened fast, within one generation. The millennials who grew up memorizing phone numbers and looking things up in physical encyclopedias are now the same people who can't recall a 7-digit number for more than 30 seconds, because they know their phone will hold it. The muscle atrophied, because it didn't need to work anymore. That's important. But there's a whole piece of this story that barely gets mentioned when people talk about life before social media. And it involves the internet that existed before most people knew the internet existed. Before AOL, before the web as most people understand it, there was an entire online world running out of people's bedrooms. It was called the Bulletin Board System, BBS. And it worked like this. Someone would set up a computer in their house, attach a modem to a phone line, and publish a number. If you knew the number, you could dial in with your own modem and access that person's system. You could chat, share files, play multiplayer games, post messages. At their peak in 1995, There were around 45,000 active boards running in the United States alone. People went by handles, not real names. There were communities, drama, inside jokes, regulars who showed up every day. All of it, years before anyone called it social media. And the whole thing had this fragile, handmade quality to it that the modern internet completely lacks. If someone in your house picked up another phone extension while you were connected, your session just died. Mid-sentence, gone. You'd have to dial back in and hope whoever you were talking to was still there. And going online at home wasn't a private, personal thing the way it is now. Dial-up meant the modem used the one phone line in the house. Everyone heard the handshake screech, that iconic noise, and everyone knew you were online because nobody could call in or out while you were. Internet access was a shared family resource you had to negotiate for. "I need the phone line from 7 to 8 was a real conversation people had. Your mom might knock on the door and tell you to get off because she was expecting a call. It was communal in this weird, accidental way that the internet has never been since. And people found workarounds for everything, because that's what you do when the tools are limited. One of the best examples, the collect call hack. When you made a collect call, an operator would ask your name before connecting you, and then relay that name to whoever you were calling before they accepted the charges. So instead of saying your name, you'd say something like, "Dad, I'm making the 4 p.m. train, pick me up at 5:30. The operator would read that out verbatim. Your dad would say, "No thanks to the charges. Call declined, message delivered, free, no texting required." People were genuinely creative about communication, in ways that just aren't necessary anymore, and there's something kind of brilliant about it. Now, if you've been watching this and nodding along to things you actually lived through, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. We do a lot of content about the experiences that shaped Millennials and Gen X, the kind of stuff that actually holds up when you look at the data behind it. And drop a comment with the thing from this era that you miss most, or the thing you absolutely do not miss, because those comments are genuinely interesting to read, and they help other people find the video. So let's bring this all together, because there's a through line here that's worth naming. Life before social media wasn't simpler in the way people usually mean when they say that. It wasn't easier. The friction was real. You couldn't find information instantly. You couldn't reach people instantly. You couldn't document things instantly. You couldn't get anywhere without either knowing the route or asking a human being to draw it for you. Every act of communication required more effort than it does now, and every act of memory required you to actually hold the thing in your head. But what that friction produced was a different relationship with attention. When taking a photo cost money and required waiting 2 weeks to see the result, you were present for the moment in a way that's genuinely hard to replicate now. When you had to memorize a phone number to call someone, that number meant something. It was proof that the relationship mattered enough to occupy mental real estate. When going online was an audible, communal event that blocked the phone line, you thought about whether you actually needed to do it right now. None of that means it was better. Party lines where your neighbors could legally eavesdrop on you were not better. Dialing 36 digits to make a long-distance call was not better. Getting your route hand-drawn by a stranger and then navigating by paper while your dad drove was not better in any practical sense. But it was different in ways that shaped how an entire generation processes information, manages attention, and relates to memory. And most of that happened so gradually that almost nobody noticed it was happening. The thing that's easy to miss is that millennials are the only generation that genuinely lived both versions. You remember the collect call hack and you have Venmo. You remember the modem screech and you have fiber internet. You remember waiting 2 weeks for photos, and you have a camera in your pocket that shoots 4K video. That dual experience, that fluency in both worlds, is actually unusual in human history. Most generations get one set of tools and build their whole understanding of the world around it. You got the old set, then watched it get replaced in real time, and had to rebuild your mental models from scratch while it was happening. And that's not a small thing. The Columbia University research on memory, the survey data on how people use their phones as cognitive extensions, all of that is measuring a change that happened to your generation specifically, in the middle of your formative years. You didn't grow up with smartphones from birth the way younger generations did. You grew up with the discipline of memorization, and then had to decide what to do with it when memorization became optional. Some of that discipline stuck. Some of it got traded away for convenience. And most people haven't stopped to think about which parts they kept and which parts they let go. So here's where we landed. 6 Degrees was the real first social network, 5 years before Friendster, and it died because the world wasn't ready for it yet. Road trips used to require a human being to literally draw your route by hand, and that friction made the trip mean something different. Photography was an economic decision, not a reflex, and the scarcity of it created a kind of intentionality with moments that's almost impossible to manufacture now. Party lines meant your neighbors could eavesdrop on your calls, caller ID didn't exist, and the whole culture around phone communication was built around managing uncertainty and cost in ways we've completely forgotten. The internet existed before most people knew it existed, running out of bedrooms on dial-up modems, and getting online was a communal household negotiation, not a personal invisible act. And the memory piece, the fact that people used to hold dozens of phone numbers and addresses in working memory by default, not by effort, that changed faster than almost any other cognitive shift in modern history. And it happened specifically to your generation, in real time. You started this video probably thinking about the obvious stuff. No smartphones, no social media, simpler times. What you actually got is a picture of a world with more friction, more intentionality, more communal dependency, and a completely different relationship with memory and attention. That's not nostalgia. That's context. And context is the thing that actually helps you understand where you are now. If you want to keep going on this kind of content, the next video is right there. It goes deep on the specific ways the millennial experience differs from every generation before and after. And some of the findings are genuinely surprising, worth watching. And if this one hit something for you, share it with someone who grew up in the same era. They'll know exactly what you're talking about.